Hi, good day, and hello to everyone that's joined us online today. It's great to be back at another summit, and it's great to be on to be involved in the conversation that we're going to have regarding gender diversity. My name is Walter Adeo. I'm a faculty member of Singularity University, as well as the Chief Executive Officer of Cadena Growth Partners. And the topic we're going to talk about is of high interest to me. It's essentially where gender diversity and the role that it plays in our work environments in our society, and where it intersects with the world of exponential technology, startups, etc. I'm delighted about the conversation we're going to have. Perhaps before we get into it, a couple of things to just think about. First of all, we talk about gender diversity sometimes as a one-dimensional thing, but it's actually, there's so much more to it. We've got to think of it along the lines of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So think of diversity as embracing the differences of various individuals in the workplace. Equity refers to the practice of promoting impartiality, fairness, and access inside our organizations and inside our societies. And then inclusion brings it all together. It's making sure that every single individual inside an organization or in a society feels as if they belong to that society. They're made to feel part of it and contribute as if they're part of it. So to help us with this conversation and to provide us with great insights, we've got two great panel members, and I've had the opportunity to have engaged with both of them in the past on a variety of different topics. First on my screen, I've got Anu Singh, and I'm going to ask Anu shortly to introduce herself and to provide a very brief introduction and perspective. And we have Henriette Kolb, who's got a phenomenal background and rich experience in the space. And I'm going to ask Henriette as well to introduce herself and to provide a bit of perspective on the topic as an icebreaker to this conversation. So, Anu, if I can turn to you and ask you to open it up for us.
Thanks, Walter. And indeed a pleasure to be here again, talking on a subject that I'm very passionate about. I'm a former company executive, so I have experienced the challenges with D&I in the workplace, and it's an area that I would like to see a lot more progress in. Thank you.
Fantastic, Henriette, and over to you.
Hello, viewers. I hope you and loved ones are safe and sound. My name is indeed Henriette. I am talking to you today from Washington, D.C., where I lead a team that's really dotted around the world to help close key gaps between men and women. As Walter so eloquently said, it indeed is the right thing to do. But we have heaps of evidence that is also the economically sound thing to do, both from a macro perspective, sort of from a governmental societal development angle, but also at the firm level. And I hope I can share with you some of those examples, how innovative companies think bigger and better for really distilling companies' cultures that are speaking to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I give you hopefully some insights on how to go about that.
Fantastic. When you hear the term gender diversity, what comes to mind? What theme around gender diversity is of the highest importance to you that we need to maybe prioritize as business leaders or as organizations?
Yeah, we really think as an investor, the International Finance Corporation invests about 30 billion annually in emerging market companies. And so what we look at when we really examine our partners and sponsors in the markets for gender diversity and equity inclusion, we look at 5 pillars: the leadership, the workforce, the consumer, the supply chain, and the community. And it really is less about what I see to be, most important. It really is where's the client at in terms of assessing these gaps and how they potentially hurt the business. And so while, for example, just to pick one, we're investing in about 900 financial institutions, while you can see that mid-management is about almost parity, slightly lower female labor force participation. If you then look at it in the C-suite, you'll see it's very loop-sided towards male decision-making and male leadership. And so we have proven the evidence that obviously diverse leadership in the C-suite and on the board makes for better financial decision. It makes also for better environmental and social and governance decisions. So we see multiple benefits. But then if you look even further into your consumers, we also realize that actually banking women entrepreneurs is absolutely key. And so, of course, as we look for, credit gaps, we see women entrepreneurs being disproportionately struggling with access to finance. But we've built a portfolio of 3 billion in dedicated investments, focusing solely on financing women entrepreneurs. And frankly, their non-performing loans rate, the NPLs, are actually the same, if not lower, compared to male-owned businesses. So we have enough evidence that actually closing those core gaps in all those 5 dimensions works. And now it's really to get to work with our partners, less on the why, but really I think the conversation has luckily moved in most parts of the world to the how.
And it's quite interesting that tremendous strides have been made, deliberately in a very orchestrated way by organizations to address some of the challenges we've had in the past. And just taking into account what Henrietta shared with us, how do you think the last 18 months, the effects of the pandemic have affected some of these initiatives? I mean, you've mentioned that a lot of great initiatives were activated and great strides have been made, but perhaps over the last 18 months, because of the pandemic, the impact it's had on the economy, the changes to the work dynamic, etc., that perhaps there's a risk that we may have regressed with some of our initiatives. What's your perspective in that regard?
Walter, definitely I agree. I think that we have regressed in some of the initiatives. We've made some good progress, but unfortunately during the pandemic, women in the workforce were impacted significantly more than men for a variety of reasons. And, one of them primarily being, the childcare responsibility as well as, household chores tends to still, fall back to the women. And, we've heard of a lot of women leaving the workforce because of burnout, just unable to work from home, having to deal with multiple things at the same time, etc. And so it's unfortunate, while the pipeline of women was growing at different levels in the organization, I think that has somewhat, slipped back a bit.
Great. If I come back to you, and in terms of the initiatives that you've taken place, your reflection on the comments that Anu shared with us, have you experienced some of those challenges with regards to the investments you've made recently, or initiatives that invested into women entrepreneurs in the last 18 months?
Yeah, Anu is absolutely right. So we've seen really key constraints, both for women entrepreneurs as well as for women who are formally employed, mainly revolving around childcare issues, but also to do with women entrepreneurs being concentrated in sectors that are really predominantly, in the areas where COVID has been worse. And so one good example is we've just recently launched an e-commerce report that looked at Africa, Jumia specifically in Lazada and Asia. We could see that actually online platforms seem to be promising as an equalizer, because we've seen before COVID hit that women entrepreneurs were almost as equally represented as sales people on the platform compared to their male counterparts. And in some countries, such as the Philippines, even exceeding their male entrepreneurs. But then COVID hit, and you look at the sales declines and you look at the shrinking of the business, and the impact has been devastating for women entrepreneurs so much more. And indeed, it has to do with these triple roles of household, childcare, or elderly care responsibility, and trying to maintain either a self-employment or a full-time employment with an employer. And so what we've helped our clients do is help them understand what flexible work policies might need to look like for women and for men, how they can support the childcare needs specifically. And oftentimes, of course, our investee clients say, well, we know how to, produce and export flowers, or we know how to make cement. We're not experts in childcare. But so we give them the tools to really help them to make the best decisions for their working parents. We've seen huge business benefits, for example, of those companies who actually support their workforce with active childcare, either in terms of vouchers, subsidies, on-site childcare, off-site, community-based childcare, the whole variety of models that need to be examined based on the country, the legal framework, as well as, of course, on the employer's capabilities. But we've seen very big payoffs if you actually take it into that direction. So we have our work cut out for us. Indeed, it's been a huge backslide, and so we mustn't despair. And I would just add one more point, which is it's not just women who have been impacted disproportionately. It's really oftentimes also minorities, more broader than just women, and then minority women even more so. So really, all kinds of inequalities have been exacerbated and need to be tripled down on.
If I reflect on what you've just said, I came across a recent statistic that highlighted that almost a third of working women have considered leaving the work environment during COVID because of, commitments, family commitments, specifically around childcare, exhaustion, overwork and stress, which I think has certainly been par for the course over the last 18 months. So it is a harsh reality that we certainly need to embrace as business leaders. From my perspective, what I've also found is that there is if you can create a flexible work environment, there's a huge untapped cognitive potential in professional women that have left the workplace for those reasons. And if you create a flexible environment that allows them to come back into the work environment while address some of the other challenges that they have, that makes the traditional work environment very constraining. There's a tremendous skill and talent that we can access. And I mean, I often think about the potential that could be unlocked for an economy, a sector, a startup, a business, etc. Something else that you refer to is, e-commerce platforms that certainly can unlock opportunities for women. One of the themes that I've spoken about at previous Singularity University summits is how digital can unlock employment opportunities. And then one of the economic constructs is a thing called collaborative consumption. So the ability for an individual to own an asset and share that asset with the community. And by doing that, they generate an income for themselves. And because the community's got access to that asset, it's the same as owning it. So the community benefits from that asset. The concept of collaborative consumption is expected to grow to the region of about $330 to $350 billion in the next 3 to 4 years. And the main recipients of collaborative consumption business models are the youth and women, which certainly highlights the importance that technology can play in addressing some of the diversity challenges in the workplace. I mean, you've certainly got a passion for this, Henrietta. Perhaps some examples that you can share with us over and above the ones that you have already highlighted that speak to how online platforms can reduce those gender gaps.
Absolutely. So we've worked on all kinds of angles. One is on ride sharing quite specifically, because we know women are less likely to own private mode of transport and be less mobile compared to their male household members. And so we looked at how can ride sharing platforms equalize access both to women as drivers as well as women as consumers of that service. And so, of course, one area that comes up again and again is safety for the consumer, right? And so all platforms really had to lean into that and tackle that massively so. But I think it has brought the industry closer together in working and solving for it. And in particular, COVID-19, again, has really exacerbated gender-based violence and sexual assault and harassment. So that's certainly top of mind. But then on the driver side, it's a more long-term game. To get enough drivers on the road, you obviously need to really incentivize drivers in a way that's sort of leading to retention and less churn on a platform. And we've seen women who've made more gains on platforms before they took up that driver job. But we've also, and that really depends on country economics and context, we've seen women make way less. And so what can we do to really pool some benefits and be more creative in making sure that online work is not just eroding benefits, but actually adding to some safety and security issues there. So we've done that on e-commerce as well. We've looked at PE and venture in tech, specifically looked at emerging market fund managers to see, where women as investee decision-making persons, and are they asking in the due diligence process into tech funds, are they asking the right questions? So a lot of things to resolve for. I think what we cannot assume that digital is just a great equalizer, because we've seen it's not, right? We had digital financial services arrive, 10 years ago. And if you now look at financial inclusion across the world. In fact, most of the financial inclusion gaps have not automatically narrowed because you have digital financial services. So there is extra work that is required in order to make platforms work for all.
Interesting. Anu, on the same topic, your views, I mean, you've got specific views on how technology can impact the gender diversity agenda. I mean, do you want to add to some of the views that Henrietta shared with us? You know, there are good elements to the technology, but there's also elements of the technology that could probably oppose some of the gender diversity intents that organizations have.
Yeah, certainly. I think, what we've seen through the pandemic, online shopping channels have accelerated. And, if women did not have digital access before, they're probably going to be even further behind now in terms of digitalization. And I think it's fundamental to close the digital access gap. And if we think about some countries on this continent and even elsewhere, women do not have proper identification. So, one of the things you do with an online shopping channel is create a user ID. So if a person does not have a proper ID, how does one identify them? How does one build a persona to be able to address and include them in the digital journey? And I think, it's fundamental that, we also understand how women buy and women behave. And, artificial intelligence, as we know, is quite controversial because people consider the conscious and the unconscious bias. And unfortunately, I guess, if most of the data has been collected from men, it is likely that the products being built will then be skewed towards men. And I think that, we can use AI now also positively to be able to kind of improve the baseline of data, as it were.
As we close up the session, and the time has really flown by, maybe, Anu, if I can ask you, if there's one message that you could leave behind to business leaders, to sector leaders, to government leaders around gender diversity, what would be that one single message or single piece of advice you'd want them to take to heart and implement?
For me, I think it would be approach it consciously to make a difference, not just within society, but also to your companies and your countries, existence. And I think
fantastic.
There's a lot that can be leveraged from including, gender diverse work teams.
Correct. Be deliberate, be conscious. I like that message. Henrietta, a similar question to you. If there's the one piece of advice that you could leave behind for business leaders, sector leaders, government leaders around gender diversity, what would be the one message or piece of advice?
Set increasingly ambitious targets. We're currently projected to close the gender gap in about 150 years. That is too long, and we're losing a lot of value and rich talent that's on the table and available. And second, resolve the childcare support system. It will be thanked not just by mothers, but by fathers and by the wider workforce. So that's one issue that I really do strongly believe governments, the private sector, and civil society need to resolve this once and for all.
So action on itself is not sufficient. We need firm action. We need pace, high cadence towards addressing this. And again, being very deliberate and being very orchestrated around what needs to be done. I can't help but think, as we close off the session, a quote that I read a while back that said, progress is a choice. And so we've got to be making the right choices with regards to gender diversity. With that, thank you very much for your time. I can't believe that the time has flown by so quickly. I certainly wish we had more time for this. This is an important conversation to have. And I think it's also an important conversation to drive that conscious awareness within the various environments in which we all operate. Henriette, thank you very much for your time. Anu, thank you as well again. And from my side, Walter Rodeo, thank you everyone for that joined this call or this panel discussion, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.